Shavua Tov, in this week's Parsha, we encounter the fascinating, mysterious concept of Tum'ah and Tahara, impurity and purity. What causes impurity? What does it mean? And how is it removed and purity restored? And who cares? Because, let's face it, these laws really were only relevant at the time when the temple stood. Today they still have application when it comes to, for example, Kohanim not being allowed to become impure to the dead. But generally speaking, we don't follow these rules in practice because we don't have the temple. So who cares? And the answer is we should care, because the deeper understanding of how these things happen can actually be a very powerful motivation for how we relate to our fellow human being. There are three different types of impurity, says the great Rabbi David Tzvi Hoffman, a great biblical commentator. The first category are those impurities which relate to contact with a dead body, tum'ot met. The second category are those that relate to impurities that come about through the reproductive organs. Specifically in this week's Parsha, we read about the woman who gives birth, and this is a politically incorrect mitzvah. A woman who gives birth is impure if it's a boy for 7 days, if it's a girl for 14 days. Why that difference? In the boy's case, she gives birth on the first day, whatever, she's impure for 7 days. On the 8th day, they have the Brit Milah, such the Torah tells us. And if there's a girl, there's no Brit Milah, she's impure for 14 days, politically incorrect. Why so? We'll come back and we'll discuss that, but that is the second category. And the third category, which is the balance of the Parsha, is dealing with skin disease or discoloration, which is sort of a pseudo kind of leprosy. That is referred to as Tum'ah. A person who has this is not considered ill, they're considered impure. And that's a significant phrase, a significant description. It's clearly, therefore, not a disease, because if this kind of pseudo-leprosy, the person who has skin discolorations, then I would say, if you have a case where somebody's got skin discolorations, who are you going to call? Not Ghostbusters, but you're going to call a doctor, and yet we don't. The doctor has no authority here. Who does? Who declares the person ritually impure because of the tzara'at, which is the name for this pseudo-leprosy? And who is the one who declares them impure and therefore forcing them to separate from the community and dwell outside the camp in, I guess you would call, solitude, quarantine, to use a contemporary term, for such a time as until they become healed? It is the Cohen. It is the priest from the temple. This is the person. It's not the doctor. It may be Dr. Cohen, but it has to be Dr. Cohen. It can't be Dr. Levy. So that implies that it's not an illness at all. There are a couple of other indications that it's not an illness. For example, a bride and groom during the 7 days of their wedding celebration do not become impure from leprosy, from this pseudo-leprosy, from tzara'at. Similarly, nobody becomes impure from tzara'at during the festivals of Pesach and Sukkot and Shavuot. So it's obviously not just a disease, because diseases don't follow rules about who, where, what. Well, what, yes, but not who or where or when. So that's the three categories. The impurity from a dead body, contact with a dead body, impurity from the reproductive organs, and impurity from the pseudo-leprosy called tzara'at. What's it all about? Why is it important? Let's take a look at the politically incorrect one. The woman who gives birth to a boy is impure for 7 days, and she has the circumcision on the 8th day for the boy. The boy has the circumcision on the 8th day. But if it's a girl, she's impure for 14 days. What is the role of the circumcision, of the bris, in this process? Is it information or formation? What do I mean? Information. That approach would say the following: that really, and the rabbis say this in the Midrash, that really the bris should happen earlier, but we don't do it earlier because we don't want the whole world to be rejoicing when the mother and father are sad. Why are the mother and father sad? Because she's impure. If she's impure, then the mother and father cannot be together. And so therefore they're sad. So therefore we do the bris on the 8th day, after she's already become pure, because we assume she will recover after 7 days. And therefore she'll become tahora, be pure again, and she can be together with her husband. And so therefore not just the whole world will rejoice that this new baby is joining the Jewish people, but also she and her husband will be able to rejoice together with them. So it is information. The 8th day is when you do the bris because it takes your 7 days. And for a girl, it takes 14. Is this politically incorrect? It may be so, but I think it may be more simply a matter of medical fact. I don't know what the statistics are, but I can tell you anecdotally that most women will say they can tell right away when they're pregnant with a girl because the pregnancy is harder and the birth process is harder. It reminds me of the story of the fellow whose wife was giving birth in the hospital, a prolonged labor, and he's out there waiting, nervous, biting his nails, biting his fingers. He's already getting up to his wrists. He's such a nervous wreck until finally the nurse comes out and says, "Congratulations," hours later. "It's a girl." And he says, "Oh, thank God she won't have to go through what I just went through." Okay, but let's take a different approach. Perhaps it's not information, but maybe it's formation. Maybe the bris causes the woman to no longer be impure. How so? A great commentary, the Gera Rebbe, in his book Sefat Emet, gives us a very unique and special explanation of impurity. Let's take the most extreme case of impurity, which is Tum'ah Met, the impurity of the dead. He says, what causes it? Because there was a soul with a divine light in it, the Shekhinah, the light of the divine presence in it, which departed from the body. And when the Shekhinah, when the divine presence departs or is even diminished, it leaves impurity in its wake. According to the magnitude of the loss is the intensity of the impurity, and therefore death, which is the ultimate departure of the divine spirit from the person, leaves the most impurity there. So now I'd like to take that and expand upon it, because I think that it is not just death that causes the spirit to be diminished. What causes that light to be diminished, and what on the other side of the coin would cause that light to be enhanced and strengthened? Connection to another soul. That is it. The Mishnah says in the tractate of Avot, two people who are speaking words of Torah to each other, the Shekhinah, the divine presence, the divine spark is present in between them. When there is a connection, there is more light. When there is more love of each other, of our fellow, there is more Shekhinah, the light shines brighter. I like to call it the Tzohar Shebateva, the glowing stone in the Ark of Noah. There is more light, more happiness, and therefore there is Tahara, purity. But when there is separation and dimming of the light, so then there is impurity. And when a person dies, well, all of the people who were connected to that person have now suffered a complete separation of connection to them, which creates a great dimming in their souls as well. And this woman who gave birth, she also suffered a dimming of her light because this baby was inside her, and the baby inside her has a soul, has a spark of the divine. Abortion is against the spirit and the law of Judaism, except for the most extreme circumstances. That's not our topic for today, but it is important to know. And the woman who has this soul inside of her is very connected. Her light is shining bright, but then she gives birth, which is a wonderful thing, but she is still separating, and there is postpartum depression. That light gets a little dimmer, and then she's not only separated from the baby, she now has to separate from her husband because she is bleeding and impure because of this, and so therefore doubly she's disconnected, so her light gets dimmer, and there is impurity. And along comes the joyous day of the Brit Milah, and then she knows that this baby is now going to reconnect not just to her, but to the entire Jewish people and to the eternity of the Jewish people. And that brings such light into her soul again that she becomes pure again. Whereas a girl doesn't have a Brit Milah, so therefore you don't have that catalyst, that formation, to cause her to become pure. So therefore her impurity has to last for yet another week. With this idea that it is connection that causes the spark to shine brighter, we also can look at another Mishnah which says what happens when the opposite is the case. 3 people who ate at a table and did not share words of Torah, says the Mishnah. It's as if they ate from sacrifices to the dead. The use of the word the dead here is a significant one, because that implies that it is as if they became impure, just like one who has been in contact with the dead, because they have been separated from each other. And with this, we can give a very unique explanation as to the mysterious commandment of how to purify one who became impure through contact with the dead, namely the red heifer, the Paraduma. This commandment is commonly believed to be a mysterious commandment, but in truth it's really not so mysterious. But there is the famous Rashi that says that the Satan and the nations of the world are mocking and critical of the Israelites, saying, what is this mitzvah? What is the meaning of this mitzvah of purifying through the Paraduma? And most people interpret it to mean that the mitzvah of Paraduma is a strange mitzvah, but it's really not. And I don't think that that's what the Satan and the nations of the world are complaining about at all. Paraduma is a red cow. I think that the Satan and the nations of the world are asking the question that Esav asked. Who was Esav? The brother of Jacob, twin brother of Jacob. Esav was out hunting one day. He came home and he was extremely thirsty and hungry, and Jacob was cooking a red lentil soup, and Esav sees the soup and he says, please, he doesn't say please, he says, Haliteni, pour me some of that soup. And Jacob says, sell me your birthright. And then Esav asks the question that the Satan and the nations of the world ask in other words. What does Esav say? He says, Hine anochi holech lamut. I'm going to die. V'lama ze li bechora. Of what use is the birthright for me? Paraphrase that, the Satan and the nations of the world are saying, life ends, we are all going to die. Of what use is the red cow? By the way, Esav's nickname in Torah is Edom, red, Paraduma, red heifer, not by accident. But they're saying basically life is meaningless. We all die in the end after 120 plus years. Life is meaningless. Why bother being pure? Just enjoy life. Be a taker. Take what you can, enjoy it while you can, because tomorrow it's gone. And that is a mindset. And it could be that the one who became impure through contact with the dead may be thinking along those lines. That may be part of their sadness. So who comes to cure them? The priest, the Cohen. The Cohen's job is to show each member of the Jewish people, and truly any human, how special and unique they are, and how welcome and important they are as part of the community. So I think that this is a novel way of understanding how the purification takes place for someone who became tamei mate, impure to the dead. The Kohen comes with this unique, most valuable thing, the ashes of a red cow, a uniquely special red cow with no black hairs and no blemishes that had never worked, something extremely rare. And focusing their attention on this individual Jew and saying to them, you cannot separate, you cannot become a taker. You are important to be part of the community, to connect. And we are coming to you to bring you back into the community. And that connection raises their spirit and causes their spark to shine brighter again. And the Tum'ah, the impurity, disappears and purity comes back into its place. Just like the celebration of the Brit Milah, of the circumcision, brings the spark back to the lady. Now let's take a look at leprosy, because the first two we talked about, the impurity of contact with the dead and the impurity of the reproductive organs, these are parts of life. But impurity through the pseudo-leprosy is completely unnecessary. The rabbis say that it is a punishment for the sin of lashon hara, evil, divisive speech. In other words, this person became impure because they used their speech to divide the people and to artificially create that separation which dims speech, which is dims their spark within them. The great Sefat Emet explains, first of all, why there is no leprosy for a bride and a groom during the 7 days of their festival, and why there is no leprosy on a chag, on a festival, and he sees it in the words. The word nega, which means a plague, You switch the letters, it becomes oneg, which means pleasure and joy. That could be the groom and the bride during their week of celebration. There's no leprosy during the time of oneg. Nega becomes oneg. And sarat, which means leprosy or pseudo-leprosy, change the letters change the order of the letters, and it becomes atzeret, which means a festival. There is no leprosy being impure during the festival, because during these times there is a great coming together. There's a great connection, and that causes their souls to shine brightly. But other than that, the person who does become impure and is now living in solitary confinement, let's call it quarantine, outside the camp, how do they become pure? So the Sfat Emet says the word for skin is or, and with an ayin. And skin is a blocker. It blocks light. It dims the light. The goal is to turn the or with the ayin into or with an aleph, which means light. And that is the job of the Cohen. Not the high priest, doesn't have to be the high priest, of the Cohen, to show the Jew that they are special. I believe that the commandment to love one's fellow as oneself is not just formation, it's information. Love your fellow as yourself. It may be telling you something. That as much as you love yourself, that will determine how much you will love your fellow. If a person is speaking divisive speech, hate speech about others, it means that they have a problem with themselves. And so the regular Cohen comes to the leper and shows them that they don't have skin which is blocking, but rather they have light inside of them, or with an aleph. And they begin to love themselves and say, you are a valuable Jew. We need you to come back and be part of society. If we can develop in ourselves a greater sense of love of ourselves, well, then we will never think to speak evil of others. And so therefore, that is the job of the Kohen, to help each Jew find that light inside them and connect and make the light shine brighter. And the more that we connect to each other, the brighter the light is, and we can enlighten a world that is sadly still far too dark. Shavua Tov.